if you don't have cyber insurance, like
You
hit
better.
pause on your
Yeah,
phone right now and call
absolutely.
your insurance agent.
Absolutely.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines of those who are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me, as always, is Florida's favorite resident, Florida man, Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning, introduce yourself, your companies, your vast companies, our sponsors, whom we love very, very much, talk a little bit about our peer groups, and then let's get into our topic.
My vast worldwide interests.
Vast,
Yes.
global
Yes,
holdings.
global.
Yes.
So, Dan Gordon, PCO bookkeepers, M&A specialists. We are CFOs to the pest and lawn industry, as well as exit planning brokerage services. And that's who I am. Our sponsors. If you are interested in marketing for the pest or lawn industry, that would be Coalmarch. And to learn more, it's coalmarch.com. If you are interested in insurance for the pest industry, the leading insurance provider in the industry is PestSure, providing insurance products tailor-made for pest and lawn. They understand your business. Learn more at pestsure.com. And for all of your voice needs, used to be telephones, but now they're voice needs.
How about communication?
Communications, AI. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff they're working on. Is Voice for Pest. And by the way, they are integrated into almost all the CRMs in the industry that I know of. Coast to coast. To learn more, it's voicedforpest.com/podcast. Make sure that you /podcast so we get credit for the.
Yeah, otherwise we don't get to count the beans, right?
and
We don't want that. Yeah.
Yep.
We
And
don't want that. We
if
don't
you're
need that, man.
interested, by the way, we have had, due to M&A activity, we've had a couple of folks leave our lawn care peer group. So there is some openings. If anybody's interested in actually a pest or lawn care peer group, but we do have some vacancies in lawn due to acquisitions that will probably be announced pretty soon.
I guess you'd call that a win, right? I mean, at the end of the day, right?
It's a win. We did the deal, so we're good. But if you're interested in joining a peer group, which I highly recommend, it's probably it gives you an education on what you don't know in the industry, and it's just terrific. And we've got several of those going. If you're interested, go back to episode 136 and listen to it. David Billingsley is our facilitator, who is outstanding. And that is enough on peer groups. Now, let's talk about our topic today.
Hey, before we do that, I think
go
we
ahead.
should probably take a moment. I don't think we've done this on previous episodes, and there is some news there. I mean, I know there's an announcement that went out, but for our longtime listeners, you probably noticed Dan is not saying Coalmarch by WorkWave. And so if you missed the news, and by the way, this is not throwing shade on either one, Coalmarch is back to being independent. And so if you're not aware of that news, you can go, they did a press release on it, those types of things. In full disclosure, I'm not affiliated, other than obviously they sponsor the podcast, but I've gotten a few questions about, am I running it? Again, I'm not, but they are independent, and they're kind of on their own again. So just again, I think it's worth stating and making. I don't think we've actually talked about it, have we? Did we talk about it on previous?
I think a little bit, but really, that the smaller the company, the more agile, the more you can move on a dime, and so
Yeah.
think there's
I think it's more of just,
advantages
hey,
to working with.
yeah. The main thing is I just want folks to make sure they know, right? I mean, again, not throwing shade either way, just making the point that, hey, if you're not aware, that's why we don't say that anymore, and that's why we say Coalmarch only. They are independent, and so, and of course, a good sponsor of our podcast, which we're are grateful for. So, with that, it's time to talk about our topic. Do you want to
Let's
introduce
talk
this?
about our topic. And this one is really, really important, close to my heart, because I had a client who was pretty, I'm going to say, shoulders deep in this. And
There's another term for that,
Right.
but we will not say that on this.
Exactly. So anyway, let's see how you what did you
Oh
do?
my, how I wordsmithed it up. Okay,
Introduction,
yes. So
0 to 5 minutes overview.
no. Hang on. So the title of the episode is Cybersecurity for Pest and Lawn Businesses: Real Threats and Real Solutions. And so the idea behind this episode, and we thought we would talk about, is this. I mean, it's becoming more and more common, and you're seeing more and more about it in the news, which are these cyber attacks. And how devastating they can be on businesses. And really, number one is just highlighting that fact, making sure our listeners are aware of what's going on. But then the second part is what can you do? I know in the past, my take on this has been buy the insurance. I've got a CRM. That's their problem. That's not a good solution. That is, I mean, that used to be the
Buy the
case.
insurance, though. That's the key.
Yes, yes. So we're going to get into that a
We'll
little
go
bit
into
more.
the yeah,
Yeah.
but before we do, I want to talk about the two types of threats that we see. So if you're running your company and you got a CRM and yeah, you're using Pest Field Routes, whatever, they've got their own, but other programs that you run, a cyber attack can lock that up so that you can't go into it, right? So then that's the ransomware. But also you have data storage, like all your documents and everything. And the other, so like the other type of attack is that they are able to get into your data storage and pull down sensitive information. And so that will not shut you down because you're still using your your programs to run the business, but all of your sensitive information is out there on the dark web, and they that one's it won't shut you down, but there's really okay. So you pay the ransom; it's still out there on the dark web, right? So not sure
Well,
how that's going to
let
work, but let's move into
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about big picture here. I'm gonna go big picture first, and then we'll get into the details. And number one is that this is a real thing now. Probably 5 years ago, it was something you heard about. I was not terribly concerned about, our industry, so I didn't talk about it a ton. I carried the insurance. I think I've carried it now for probably 10 years. But the fact is that it's becoming more and more common. And listen, over half the cyber attacks are happening in the small business. You think that this is happening to banks and it's happening to these high-end financial institutions, and they are, but the real money that these hackers are getting, they're getting them from small businesses. And the staggering statistic here, we'll include this in on the podcast notes, is that 95% of the breaches are attributed to human error, which means that you can batten down the hatches all day long.
right.
You can
Right,
you
right.
can do everything there is to do, and if someone calls up and says, "Hey, honey, I want to know I've lost my password," and they give it, and then next thing you know, right? I mean, you could have a real problem. And this sounds so basic. It sounds so basic, but listen, I promise you, if you go and talk to anyone on your staff, not anyone, I shouldn't say that. Go in your office and just call and ask some sort of sensitive question and see what happens, because the fact is that, your financial data is only as secure as the dumbest person that has access to it. I mean,
You're
legitimately.
absolutely. But by the way, you don't have to be dumb. You might those emails that you click on that you probably shouldn't click on. Well, that installs some malware that monitors what you're doing, grabs the passwords, and so you might not even know it. The Chase Bank email that you got, but the email address up top is some crazy email address. You
And they
don't
don't even
click on
need that.
that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they don't even need that. I mean, listen, and I think I talked about this in a previous podcast. I'm going to tell a quick story and then we'll get into this segment here. But it was the most sophisticated one that I have personally ever experienced. And this is something that personally happened in my life. This was probably about 4 years ago. Princess Shelton wanted lights on the house. So I engaged with a contractor to put lights on the house.
It's
So
yeah.
so Princess gets the lighting, and we get it all set up, and the guy's out. He's out looking at the lights. It's like it's right at dusk. So he's put all the lights out. He's making sure everything's shining where it needs to be, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. And as he's finishing up, I say, "Hey man, how do you want me to pay you? You want me to give you a check? You want me to, you want me to send you, electronic payment, whatever? He's like, yeah, just, he's like, just get me on PayPal, but do it, like just pay me on PayPal. And I'm like, sweet. So we're emailing back and forth. And he's like, yeah, pay me on PayPal. Here's where you go. We pay the guy on PayPal. And so we leave on vacation. And I think I've told this story before. And if I'm acting like
No,
crap,
I haven't heard it. Go ahead.
yeah, so this is crazy. So we pay him. I paid him that night because we're leaving on vacation. And so we leave. I think we're going to the beach or something like that. It's like 4 days later, and he calls me. He's like, "Hey Donnie, you gonna pay me?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't say that." I'm like, "What are you talking about, dude? I paid you already." He goes, "We haven't seen anything on PayPal." And I'm like, I can send you the receipt that I have paid you on PayPal." And lo and behold, I go back on PayPal and I had paid it and I forwarded him the account. And he's like, that's not my account. And I said, well, I've got an email from you saying that this is where you wanted payment sent. And Dan, it was the craziest thing.
It wasn't his email.
Turns out what had happened is that hackers had intercepted, they had figured out the password to his email and they set up rules. And so there's a hacker who was sitting in between his email. And so whenever he was communicating out, it went to this hacker's inbox. And then the hacker would modify that email and then send it out from his email address. And so anything in and out was going through this, through this hacker or whatever. I mean, and so he had intercepted this and gotten the money. And it was a pretty significant amount. And the guy comes back to me and says, hey, you need to pay this. And I'm like, dude, nope. You're going to take it up with your insurance. I'm like, I got an email from your verified email address saying that this is where I needed to pay, and that's what I did, and I've got receipt of me doing that. So you need to take this up with insurance. Now, the story doesn't end there. He ended
By the
up,
way, how many other people of his customers?
yeah. So that was where I was getting to. So this attack was pretty sophisticated. I think they ended up getting over like $300,000 or $400,000 from the guy. His insurance got him back. But ultimately, this was a case of where the hackers had no access to his financial information. They had access. I mean, it's not like they had to break the CRM in order to get the money. They got in through his email. And so, a simple solution for that is if you're using Google Apps, and I know that, by the way, if you're a longtime listener to this podcast, you know that Dan is all about Google Apps, which I love. But if you're a Google subscriber, you can turn on two-factor authentication. There's things that you can do to make sure that you're going back to your data is only as secure as your dumbest person that you have dealing with it. You need to make sure things like that are turned on because in this case, this person didn't come in through breaking the bank, right? They didn't come in through some sophisticated way. They just basically found that his email password was probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and said, oh, that's called a brute force attack. They figured it out. They set up rules. They got in between all this communication. And the next thing you know, they started redirecting funds. And so that personally happened to me. And listen, I don't consider myself very sophisticated. If you spend any time with me, I'm not. But I can typically get my way around on the computer, right? I'm not too, and listen, this was as legit as they come because it came straight from me. And we had just had that conversation that night. He said, yeah, pay me on PayPal. And so sure enough, he sends me that stuff on PayPal and I paid it and boom, we were done. And that was something that happened to me personally. And I was just shocked. Number one, that the hacker had gotten into his email and was intercepting the emails. But number two, that it was all fully authentic. When I say authentic, it wasn't like, how sometimes people send you emails and it's like Dan like 2 A's or something like that, Dan Gordon. They'll do something where you can kind of tell like, okay, this is not legit. This was not that way at all. It was pretty sophisticated and not very difficult to repeat. So for those listeners out there, maybe a little bit, I don't know, devious, don't get any ideas. But in any case, that's something that went down. And so this whole idea that 95 of the data breaches are attributed to human error, that is just a silly password. And so these are all simple things that you can do, where number one is like on Google Apps, that if you're a Google Apps customer or whatever, they can force like how sophisticated the password is. You can force people to change it every 90 days. You can also enforce two-factor authentication. And I highly recommend if you're not doing that, even though it's a PITA, that you do that, because I can tell you right now, well, that might be a PITA, and if you don't know what that is, Google it. Um, I can promise you, losing a lot of money and talking to your customers and figuring it out with insurance companies is going to be much more of a bigger pain than that ever is. So,
Well, it's funny that scenario, we've seen that several times because these hackers think because we do the accounting that we have access to money. So we've gotten several emails from the bookkeeper at our client. Hey, I need you to wire this money to here. And we're, as soon as it comes through, we're kind of suspicious. We call up, hey, just send that email. No, what
what
email?
email?
And then they go in and they realize that their email
Uh-huh.
is compromised and that somebody else is controlling it. That's probably happened at least a half a dozen times that I can count. But
Well,
luckily,
have you sent a wire with the bank recently? I mean, outside of a blood sample, it doesn't go, man. I mean, like I've sent a wire here recently, and it's like I had to call, and then someone else called me back, and it was a third person that called me right before they sent the wire and says, "Hey, I'm confirming all of this before you." So it is absolutely, going to your point, Dan. I mean, this is very, very common. So,
yeah.
all righty, are we ready to jump into this now?
Yeah, but
All right.
we got some good ones because I've got a great story and lessons learned. But go
Well,
ahead.
we're going to go into the real world. Let's just talk about big picture first for you to think
Yep.
about. So the first one we've already covered, which is like, these phishing scams, and listen, these are pretty common. These are emails that where somehow someone is able to get some credentials from one of your staff members, and so this would be kind of what you just said, Dan. Hey, I need to send a wire. You need to send me a wire. Or there's this case of like, hey, I've lost my password. Can you send it to me? Blah, blah, blah. Any case where they're soliciting passwords, financial information, those types of things. That's kind of more your phishing scams. And listen, these things are freaking sophisticated these days,
Mhm.
especially with the advent of AI, because you can feed AI a ton of data on this person and it can sound just like them. It can replicate them. And listen, there's even ways if you got their voice recorded, it can even sound like them. So phishing scams will always be there. I think
By
we're,
the way, it's not always somebody asking for something. It's somebody sending you an invoice that you don't recognize
oh,
or
yeah,
something,
no.
and you click on it and you say, "Geez, nothing happened." Well, meanwhile,
Right.
that
Yeah.
just happened.
Meanwhile, you're
They
downloading software. Right. So,
installed some magnifying glasses that can
so
cut
that's the first
the
one. The
quality of it.
second one, which I'm not terribly concerned about in our industry because most of us run our software online, which is ransomware attacks. And we're going to put some case studies in. We'll put this in on the show notes because I don't think we're going to have enough time to get into it. But there's definitely been these ransomware attacks that have shut companies down. And I mean, one famous one I can remember is the Colonial Pipeline that happened here on the East Coast. This was probably about 4 years ago, and there was no gas. I mean, do you remember this when this
Yeah, I
happened to
do.
Colonial? They shut down that company. And so if you've got like local servers, if you're hosting local data, I don't think most people in our industry do that anymore. And if you're listening to this and you're nervous, you damn well should be, and you should be thinking about getting it out to someone else. But these ransomwares where they'll install some sort of malware. They'll take your data, they'll encrypt it, and say, "Well, you're not getting it until you pay some money." And so that would be the second type. So the first is phishing, the second was ransomware. And then the third one are these data breaches, which is where they gain access to customer data, whether it be payment, whatever. Luckily, in our industry, we're not storing things. I mean, we obviously have the credit card numbers, but we're not storing things like social security numbers. At least you shouldn't be. I can't imagine why you would ever need anything like that. But outside of name, address, phone number, I
Well,
don't even have access to the card data.
you got to
Um,
be careful because what we find with a lot of clients, yes, the pest packs and the field routes and whatnot, they're compliant. But what we find is that a lot of CSRs just to get things, they'll put the credit cards in the notes rather than where they belong,
yeah.
or someone, right?
Oh,
And
even
well,
better.
yeah,
It's written
so
down.
yeah,
It's
so
written
it's
down.
in there, and you're not using your CRM properly,
I
but
can't believe I'm about ready to disclose this, but I'm going to do it because it reminds me of what you just said, which was, I told you that Princess Shelton wanted to have lights. Well, listen, I am very fortunate because she also books all of my travel. And one day I'm like talking to her about it. She goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah, let me look it up." And she pulls up this Google document, every credit card I own, every password I have, everything. And I mean, listen, if someone gets access to this document, my life's
you're
over.
done. Yeah, 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 yeah.
but my point is like, look, this could absolutely be happening in your office. And so, we talk about this, to your point, Dan. I mean, if you don't put stuff in the right spot, or it absolutely could still be exposed as far as these data breaches. So that's kind of the
We,
third piece.
I don't have a horse in this race, but in our office, we use something called LastPass, and
Right.
LastPass it manages all your passwords. You can't get into it. And then we actually have a VPN. So if you can't access LastPass to even ask it the passwords unless it's coming from a certain IP address in our VPN, and we're pretty paranoid about all of this stuff because we're going for this
Yeah.
certification.
Yeah. You know what's funny is there's actually a story about a guy who worked for Disney, and he didn't use LastPass. I think he was using First Password. He was using one of these things, and somehow a hacker got his password to that.
Right.
And then they had everything, and they got into Disney's network through this worker. And anyway, he ended up losing his job, but that's another story for another
Imagine.
Dr. Phil episode. So anyway,
Right.
point being is that you just need to understand, like, this stuff is real. It absolutely can happen. And again, your data is only as secure as your dumbest person that has access to it. So that is kind of the common threats. Now let's get into real world case studies. And I want to hear about this case study that you have, Dan, with a particular client. Walk me through, because I talked about my experience. Now let's hear
Yeah.
about yours.
So basically, it was a data storage breach. One of the employees, it was like one of these data vaults that they keep,
Uh-huh.
you keep your documents in. And one of the employees clicked on something on an email, and this hacker actually found, was able to get the credentials to get in there. And so in there were their, banking information, credit card information, all the sensitive stuff that they use. And it went out to the dark web. And the client was contacted by FBI and Homeland Security.
Let me pause you there real quick for our
Yeah.
listeners that don't know what the dark web is. And I think most people do, right? There's a whole nother network of folks where, the dark web is where no one can know who you are. And there's all these kind of like things that pop around. But all kinds of just bad stuff gets published here. And once it's there, obviously you can imagine what crowd that attracts.
Right.
And then that can be used for other purposes later on. So continue on there, Dan.
Well, and hackers will sell information on the dark web. Hey,
Right.
got this data vault with 50 bank statements in it. How much are you willing to pay? Whatever.
Right.
So anyway, goes out. Client gets contacted by FBI and Homeland Security. He thinks it's a joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they keep contacting him, calls local police department. The local police department said, yeah, it's true. The FBI and Homeland Security have found this group of hackers, and information's out on the dark web, and you need
That's
to do something
crazy.
about it.
Yeah.
Well, so here's what happens. He has the cyber insurance, which everybody should do. The
By the
cyber
way, let me pause you. If you don't have cyber insurance, like
taking
hit
customer
hit
credit
hit
cards, you
hit
better.
pause on your phone
Yeah,
right now and call your
absolutely.
insurance agent.
Absolutely, because I'm
Start
going to
listening.
tell you, I'll tell you how much this whole thing cost, and what the cyber insurance company does, right? So, you have auto insurance, you crash your car, they fix your car. You have cyber insurance, and they immediately hook you up with a coach, a cyber breach coach that coordinates your claim. And you need that there's three groups that they hook you up with right away: the lawyer, a a cyber a forensics company, and a PR company. So you say, well, why do I need a lawyer? Well, when you get breached like that, every single breach that you have, and depending on where it is or where the information for the breach, that state has jurisdiction over cyber attacks. And every attorney general in every state has rules about reporting. You must report. Now, some states, well, if it's just one data point, you don't have to report it. But the lawyers actually have to research it, because you have to make a statement and report it to the state. In addition, you have to talk about how you're going to, make the breached party whole. And those come in the form of those letters that you receive now every day,
Mhm.
that they've been breached and they want to monitor your credit. Well, that's part of that. And every state has one of those. So that's the lawyers. But then the forensics, that guy or that group has to go in and determine how you got hacked and what was breached, what's out there on the dark web or that kind of thing. And then they do a report, and that's how the lawyer gets that information. So then you say, why do you need a PR agency? Well, because you have to notify all of your customers that this breach has happened and just wait until you see what happens on social media, right? If I'm using your pest control company and you got my credit card and now Princess Shelton's got all new clothes,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh my
and
gosh, that's
then
hilarious. Yep.
um, so the PR company has to help mitigate that, and that's so that I believe he's got a $10,000 deductible, but the cyber insurance company probably laid out $150,000
Right.
doing all of this to get them in shape, and did anything come of it? You still don't know because, you were talking about before you were talking about ransomware attacks shutting down your business, but this is a data breach. So that information's out on the dark web. So when you get contacted to say, okay, we got your information, pay the ransom in Bitcoin to some Romanian bank account,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
Then what happens is, how do you know they're going to remove it from the dark web? They're not going
Hmm.
to, right? So it's sitting out there. And I don't know if you have one of these, Donnie. I have a credit monitoring service, and occasionally they'll talk about my email being out on the dark web, and I'll
Oh yeah,
change my
yeah.
email, my personal email, because you use the same password for your garage door and everything, but I don't do that anymore. I haven't done it in about 5 years, but I use this monitoring service. So when anything of mine is out on the dark web, I get a warning. And by the way, if you don't think, oh, well, I'm not on the dark web, go get one of these monitoring services. You'll see how much of your stuff is out there.
I was going to say if you're, so I use Google One, not because but this comes with it, right? In Gemini, I have Google One because of Gemini. I use Gemini a lot, but this is one of the services that they provide as part of it. And it's the same thing. I'll get one of those emails that says, hey, your info's been on the dark web. Listen, I'm at a place where it's like, listen, I know that half my stuff's out there, and if people want to see stuff, fine. I'm not being apathetic. It's just like there's things that I can control and things I can't control. And
Right.
I mean, I'm going to lock down the really, really heavy stuff. Of course, I'm going to do that. But I mean, I've got a password I've been using on my fitness pal, and if someone wants to log in there and look at what I ate today, knock yourself out. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like it's
Well,
fun.
on your fitness thing, do you have a credit card in there are they
I
doing anything
I
for you?
don't. You know what? It's actually managed through Apple, and so it's like an Apple subscription. And so anyway, a couple of other things we want to talk about. Getting and so in the end, it cost. I think you said it cost over 100 grand to
Oh,
get it.
well over
All.
100 grand
Yeah.
to
So that's
get
kind of.
it.
And listen, that's someone in our industry. So that's the part that I think this is one of the reasons we want to do the episode is that, if you think it's out there, it's not. It's in here. And we're going to put up kind of 3 case studies, and we're not going to get into them now. But one was where it was like a 158-year-old company that ransomware actually shut it down. Like the company is no longer in business because they got hacked. They took all their data and they couldn't pay the ransom and they just killed them. Another one we're going to put up is about a data breach. And then the last one's kind of a funny one, which is I don't know if you remember this or not, but Krispy Kreme got hacked and they couldn't sell online anymore. They told their customers, said, just come inside if you need something. Like it could,
Uh,
I mean, it completely took down their store. And so we'll link these articles up online. I mean, really what I want to get to here, and I want to spend the last few minutes getting to talking about this is like, well, what do you do? Right. And we haven't talked about this, but it's probably the most important part, which is you remember the first stat I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, which is 95% of the breaches are attributed to human error. So the question I have for our listeners is, when's the last time that you trained your staff on identifying phishing attempts or safe online practices? This is very easy training to get. There's several, online, like little not tutorials, but like trainings that you can do, and they'll make them so that they can't click off of. They actually have to watch it. And so my point to you is that this is something that if you're not doing regular training, you absolutely should, because again, going back to the very first thing I said, that your data is only as secure as the dumbest person has access to it. So think about that. I'm not calling your staff dumb. I'm not saying anything like that at all. I'm just making the point that the best thing you can do is employee training. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you can start enforcing strong, unique passwords and two-factor authentication. And you can, whether you're on Microsoft or Google Apps or whatever, both platforms make this very, very easy to do. And if you don't know how to do it, find someone who can help you do that, because the fact is that, these are things that should just be policies in your company. These are things that should just be, just something that you force every 90 days. It's a pain in the butt and everyone hates it. But at the same time, it's like, if you don't do this and someone gets access, it's a pain in the butt being out of business too, and being out of money and going through the whole insurance process. So that's the second thing.
The two things that I would tell you are monitor so that you can figure these things out. So I use one called ID Watchdog. That's for personal. And then we use D&B for the business. So if something gets out on the dark web or whatever, we get, because it could happen to you and it could go on for months. You wouldn't even know it if you have any sort of monitoring service.
Yep. The other thing I would say in these next two, if you're doing like PestPack or Routes or whatever software you're using, this is probably already done for you, which is, making sure you're doing backups and that they're secure and that they're stored offsite if you have stuff that's internal, and then making sure that you use secure payment systems. Now, PCI compliant, that's a whole nother ball of wax. Okay, let me tell you what's not PCI compliant. People in your office writing down credit card numbers. Let me tell you something else not PCI compliant. People in your office putting credit card numbers where they don't belong. Dan talked about that before. So just make sure that folks are not doing that, right? Making sure that it is kind of a pain not to have access to the card, but that's just good data hygiene, and you don't want that stuff out, because if it gets out and it turns out that it's on you, well, good luck with that, right? Because then you're going to be getting to our next point, which is make sure you invest in cyber insurance. If you don't have that, make sure that you get it. Make sure you get enough to cover yourself, commensurate to the size of your business. Just make sure that that you understand it. And listen, a bit of business advice I got many, many years ago, and it has paid off well, is that whenever it comes to insurance, that's not one place that you want to go cheap, right? I mean, there's places in the business to cut money. That's not one of them, And I would say
just get one claim and you'll see why, right?
Right. And I would say the same for for cybersecurity. It's the same as just like auto, whatever. So, all righty. A few more things just to think about is, do you force on all your PCs or MacBooks or whatever it is, do you force all of them to be updated to the latest security patches? That's important to do. The main thing is that, just make sure that you have some sort of incident response plan in place, that if something does happen, you know what to do. Listen, I'm not a security expert, but there's folks out there who are. Again, the idea behind this episode is just to alert folks what's going on, and make sure that, if you're not thinking about this, if you don't have it on your radar, certainly get it on your radar, and make sure that you get yourself covered, because, if you're listening to this, we obviously want to give you some good info and some things to think about. And it's more and more common in our industry, which is probably the real reason that we're talking about it. So, all righty. I was saying a lot there, Dan. What do you got to add? Anything?
Passwords. It's not your first child and their birthday. When you use something like LastPass, LastPass will auto-generate passwords for you that have, all kinds of, symbols and capital, and there's no way you can remember the password, and it's locked there in LastPass. LastPass is a great tool. The first time when we first subscribed to it, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, geez, this thing's kind of expensive. And it really isn't. But I was just like, to manage passwords, I could make a Google Doc like Princess Shelton and put everything in there.
And I put it in there with my credit cards.
Yeah, I have my credit cards, so that way they're easily accessed, right? Anyway, LastPass takes care of all of this, and you can't really hack it. And it creates the passwords that are not hackable, not your dog dog's
Right.
name and birthday.
Exactly.
So, so passwords are extremely, extremely important.
And I listen, there's all kinds of software out there. There's LastPass. I think there's Password One. I mean, there's all
Yeah.
kinds of, I think the main thing out of that, and to your point, Dan, is that, take the time, figure it out, get something in place. And, the more that you can lock down, the more that you have good data hygiene, the better. You just don't want to expose yourself to stuff because, again, this is becoming more and more common. And with the advent of AI, it's going to be more and more difficult to defend yourself, because it's just so easy, to someone to call you or send you an email and it look authentic. And then next, everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's got a busy day going on. They're just trying to get things checked off. And it gets very, very easy just to like miss something. Next thing you know, you're on the dark web.
I'll tell you also,
we're doing an
so
episode on you.
those of
So
you who those of you who use QuickBooks Online, which is just about all of our clients, QuickBooks Online has an option where you can set up authentication. So in order to log in, you actually have to have an authenticator on your cell phone. So all of our client managers have that, right? But so if I want to go into QuickBooks, it says, okay, great. Tell us the authenticator name, and that you have this authenticator on your cell phone that generates these authentication codes that you put in. I highly recommend that you use, authentication, so that people can't hack your QuickBooks. Because QuickBooks, it used to be, that's an accounting program. Who cares if somebody gets my P&L and knows, but now you download banking information. It's got, credit card information. It's got a lot of stuff that, years ago you didn't have. So QuickBooks, if it's not locked down, can be a source of, or can be problematic in a hack,
Sure. All righty. Well, listen, that brings us to the end of another episode. Just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talked about today are going to be available on the podcast website. Just take a look over on pmpindustryinsider.com. Don't misspell it. You might be going to a hacked site. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, take a look under show notes.
Great.
We'll have this episode up along with these case studies that we didn't actually get to, or at least the ones that we can disclose. And then, again, we always appreciate any ratings, reviews that you have for us. And I know Dan, he often talks about how appreciative he is if anyone has any complaints or just, general complaining in general. That's what he really enjoys. So with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care now.
See ya.